Ukrainian air defense missiles to run out by May, WSJ. Kiev's forces are burning through their Soviet-era stocks, the Pentagon reportedly believes. Ukraine will run out of most of its anti-air missiles by May, the Wall Street Journal reported on Monday, citing classified Pentagon documents leaked on social media. Facing the prospect of Russian air superiority, Kiev has been asking for more air defense systems from the West for months. According to a purported Pentagon presentation dated February 28, Ukraine is expanding around 69 Buk missiles and 200 S-300 missiles per month, the newspaper reported. At this rate of fire, Kiev's forces will be out of Buk ammunition by the end of this week, and will deplete its S-300 stockpile by May 3, it said. Sourcing missiles for these Soviet-built platforms is proving difficult for Kiev and its Western backers. In their place, Ukraine has received 3 German Iris-T and 8 American NASAMS anti-air systems. However, these systems consume around 64 missiles per month, and their limited number cannot cover as much territory as Ukraine's S-300s, according to the document. To cover the shortfall, American military planners reportedly estimate that Ukraine needs 16 Iris-T or NASAMS batteries and 12 Patriot or SAM-T batteries. U.S. President Joe Biden has authorized the deployment of 1 Patriot battery, while Germany has pledged another and France and Italy have promised 1 SAM-T system. None of these have reached Ukraine yet, a Ukrainian military spokesman told the Wall Street Journal. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has been asking the U.S. and its allies for more air defense systems since last year, calling this equipment his #1 priority. Zelensky and his aides have also pleaded for Western-made fighter jets like the American F-16. And while some European countries have said they are open to the idea, the U.S. has thus far refused. The Pentagon has not yet confirmed the authenticity of the presentation, which is part of a trove of secret documents leaked and posted on social media over the last week. Other files in the leak detail the US war plans in Ukraine, its surveillance of its allies, and other sensitive material related to Ukraine, China, the Middle East, and terrorism. PLA Eastern Theater Command completes patrol, military exercises around Taiwan Island. The Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, on Monday successfully completed all tasks of combat readiness security patrol encircling the Taiwan Island and joint sword exercise. In a statement issued on Monday evening, Shi Yi, spokesperson for the command, said the integrated joint operational capabilities of different PLA services and branches under realistic combat scenarios had been comprehensively tested during the drills, which took place from Saturday to Monday. When announcing the operations on Monday, Xi said they served as a stern warning against the collusion between separatist forces seeking Taiwan independence and external forces and against their provocative activities. The PLA practiced seizing control of sea, air, and information on Saturday, and carried out simulated joint precision strikes on key targets on the island of Taiwan and in its surrounding waters on Sunday. The Shandong aircraft carrier group joined Monday's drills. In a video broadcast by China's Central Television, a J-15 carrier-borne fighter jet is seen taking off from the deck of the aircraft carrier. During the exercises, several destroyers and frigates conducted suppressive combat patrol missions, as they carried out training courses including assaults on fleeing hostile vessels and maritime blockade. Zhang Benming, an officer with the Unified Command of the PLA Eastern Theater Command, said the military services advanced the all-weather and multi-directional encircling of the island of Taiwan, comprehensively testing their ability of command control. Precision strike and three-dimensional blockade supported by the Unified Command System. Zhang said that the command troops will prepare for and be ready for battle at all time, and crush any kind of Taiwan independence, secessionist or external interference attempts. U.S. hatched plan to threaten Russia with Nord Stream sabotage in late 2021, S.Y. Hersh says. President Biden publicly warned Moscow in early February of 2022 that the U.S. would bring an end to the Nord Stream network if Russia began a military operation in Ukraine. Washington. made good on that promise last September, with veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh providing the details in a bombshell Substack piece this past February. The Biden administration hatched plans to threaten Moscow with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines about 2 months before the escalation of the Donbass crisis into a full-blown conflagration between Russia and Ukraine, Seymour Hersh has said. The demand was issued just before New Year's Eve 2021, probably around Christmas, Hersh said in an interview with independent German media published Monday. The idea was to find something out of the ordinary that the president could use, a lure or a threat to convince Putin not to attack. Above all, it was a threat. I don't think this administration is very good at persuasion. They operate more along the lines of "you are either with us or against us." The idea was to tell Putin, "If you cross the border into Ukraine, we will blow up the pipelines," Hersh added. The veteran investigative journalist also pointed to another interesting detail about the weeks leading up to the conflict in Ukraine, saying he found it interesting that hardly anyone pays attention to the fact that the forces Russia had at its disposal in February 2022 numbered about 120,000 men, far fewer than required to defeat a country the size of Ukraine. So if people are still saying that Putin wanted to take Kiev, you have to tell them, that's just not the case. That would not have been possible at all. There were at least 60,000 troops in Kiev in the spring of 2022, Ed. And because Putin didn't take the city, people like to say he failed. But I just can't imagine how he could have done it with so few troops. It's also worth remembering that the US and NATO greatly increased the numbers and upgraded the capabilities of the Ukrainian army in recent years, making this army at least formidable, Hersh said. The journalist suggested that whatever motivated Russia's actions in the early days of the conflict, one thing is clear: Putin did not use extreme force. Hersh believes that what Moscow wants in Ukraine isn't physical control or annexation, but it's demilitarization and a measure of political control over an area, particularly as far as foreign policy is concerned. The problem driving the crisis, in Hersh's estimation, is that Kiev has rejected demilitarization. Furthermore, he said, even if Moscow and Kiev were willing to negotiate a compromise, in the end it won't matter because we, the US, Ed, don't want it that way. The US has promised new money, including for fighter jets. We could train Ukrainian pilots to fly the F-16, which, by the way, is an old plane that the Russians could shoot down relatively easily. But don't tell that to the newspaper people. What the US and NATO are doing right now lies somewhere between stupid and crazy. Whatever comes next with the Nord Stream investigations, Hersh is confident that the Biden administration will never admit its responsibility, and that the legacy media in the US would be perfectly happy with such a state of affairs. The journalist fears the conflict in Ukraine could drag on for years, although if Putin deploys his troops more decisively, things might go faster. The US, he said, has already spent nearly $120 billion on the conflict to date, and will need to spend a lot more, something that might prove difficult as public opinion gradually turns against US policy. Hersh also reiterated that the Nord Stream attack was just as much an attack on Europe as it was on Russia, pointing out that when the attack took place in September, winter was just around the corner, and Germany had proven only partially successful in filling up its underground reserves. Unusually mild weather and deliveries of explosively priced liquefied natural gas helped, but led to a state of permanently high energy prices. What happens next? If it gets colder again in the fall and gas prices don't come down, there will be more resentment against the man who started this crisis, Joe Biden. I don't know what your chancellor is doing or what he's done. I don't know if he knew in advance or not. But by blowing up the pipelines, Biden was telling the Europeans, I don't have your support, I'm afraid you might falter if it comes to a stalemate with Russia. It was his way of saying, I need more money from the NATO partners, maybe even troops, especially from Germany, Hersh said. This could prove important for Biden in the long term, the journalist believes, given the threat of a U.S. economic downturn, inflation, high interest rates and bank failures. Hersh compared the decision to strike Nord Stream to the Bush administration's decision to respond to 9/11 by invading Iraq, saying there's a word for such policy, stupidity. Biden certainly has a chance of being included in the list of dumbest post-war U.S. presidents. Blowing up an ally's gas supply, leaving the German chancellor with problems keeping his citizens warm and Germany prosperous is unwise. I don't know what will happen to Scholz. I really don't know. I'm speaking to people from the Bundestag, but nothing seems to be happening there. Where is the German report on Nord Stream, Ed? When will it be published? In 3,000 years? The journalist pointed out that during the German Chancellor's famous visit to Washington in February 2022, about 2 weeks before Russia kicked off its special operation, where Biden warned openly that if Russian troops crossed into Ukraine, there will be no longer a Nord Stream, we will bring an end to it, the German Chancellor remained silent instead of challenging the U.S. president. It would have been nice if Scholz had said, I support the president in everything he said, but blowing up the pipelines would be unacceptable. But he didn't say anything. His biggest problem is that he has become a collaborator since my first Nord Stream story. He denied nothing, protested nothing, investigated nothing, Hersh said. Hersh's bombshell reporting on the Nord Stream attack now serves as the basis of Russia's calls for an independent, international investigation into the act of terror. After ignoring his reporting and then trying to smear the Pulitzer Prize winner as a discredited journalist, legacy media have come up with alternative explanations about who was responsible. Citing a mysterious pro-Ukrainian group with no links to any government and a rented yacht purportedly used to carry out the attack. Media tweaked the yacht story last week to say that it may have been only a decoy in a much larger operation after a backlash about the original story's unbelievable claims. Russian draws first blood in world title match. Ian Nepomniachtchi overwhelmed Ding Liren in the second game of the World Chess Championship in Astana. Russia's Ian Nepomniachtchi has scored a victory over China's Ding Liren in the second game of the 14-game match for the title of World Chess Champion at the St. Regis Hotel in Astana, Kazakhstan. The first game on Sunday ended in a draw. Nepomniachtchi defeated Ding in Game 2 in just 29 moves despite having the black pieces, which is considered a small disadvantage in professional chess. Ding attempted to surprise his opponent with an unusual move in the opening, 4. H3, but Nepomniachtchi kept his composure. With months to prepare for a match, players often attempt spring opening surprises that are the result of extensive analysis. When Ding eschewed a more natural continuation and opted for a very sharp line on move 12, the Russian was able to build up a powerful kingside attack. Running out of time and in a hopeless position, Ding threw in the towel after Nepomniachtchi's move pawn to e5, attacking his opponent's rook and threatening to queen's pawn on the c2 square. Decisive games are often few and far between in World Championship matches. The last rendition of the event, held in Dubai in 2021 between reigning world champion Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi, saw the first 5 games end in draws before Carlsen notched a victory in a marathon Game 6, which ran for nearly 8 hours. The 2018 title match between Carlsen and American challenger Fabiano Caruana did not feature a single decisive game, all 12 ended in draws and the winner was decided in the ensuing tiebreak at shorter time controls. The 2023 match consists of 14 games at classical time controls, with each player receiving 120 minutes for the first 40 moves, 60 minutes for the next 20 moves, and 15 minutes for the rest of the game, with 30 seconds added per move starting with move 61. Tuesday is a rest day and the action will resume on Wednesday with Nepomniachtchi playing with the white pieces. Document leak has U.S. officials facing impact at home and abroad. The U.S. national security community is grappling with fallout from the release of dozens of secret documents, including the impact on sensitive information sharing within the government and ties with other countries, 2 U.S. officials said. Reuters has reviewed more than 50 of these documents, labeled secret and top secret, that first appeared on social media websites in early March and purportedly reveal details of Ukrainian military vulnerabilities and information about allies including Israel, South Korea, and Turkey. The material did not draw much notice until a New York Times article on Friday. Although the release of documents appears to be the most serious public leak of classified information in years, officials say it so far does not reach the scale and scope of the 700,000 documents, videos, and diplomatic cables that appeared on the WikiLeaks website in 2013. Officials are looking at what motivations a U.S. official or a group of officials would have in leaking such sensitive information, Reuters reported, citing an official speaking on condition of anonymity. The official said investigators were looking at 4 or 5 theories, from a disgruntled employee to an insider threat who actively wanted to undermine U.S. national security interests. The White House referred questions to the Pentagon, which said on Sunday that it was reviewing the validity of the photographed documents and an interagency effort was assessing the impact the photographed documents could have on U.S. national security as well as that of close American allies and partners. The Pentagon has referred the issue to the Department of Justice, which has opened a criminal investigation. Watching allies. The leaks have already drawn responses from some foreign governments. One of the documents marked top secret and from a CIA intel update from March 1, says the Mossad intelligence agency was encouraging protests against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plans to tighten controls on the Supreme Court. The document said the U.S. learned this through signals intelligence, suggesting the United States had been spying on one of its most important allies in the Middle East. In a statement on Sunday, Netanyahu's office described the assertion as mendacious and without any foundation whatsoever. Another document gave details of internal discussions among senior South Korean officials about U.S. pressure on Seoul to help supply weapons to Ukraine, and its policy of not doing so. The office of South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said on Monday that fact checks on the documents are a priority and that it would request the U.S. to take appropriate steps after confirming details. Yoon's office said the possibility that the documents were fabricated or a product of third-party interference cannot be ruled out, warning any attempts to disrupt the alliance would face repercussions. Some lawmakers of South Korea's main opposition Democratic Party expressed strong regret over the spying allegations, calling them a clear violation of national sovereignty and a major security failure of the Yoon administration. Another document marked top secret purportedly detailed how Russian private military contractors met with Turkish contacts to buy weapons from Ankara. The Turkish embassy in Washington declined to comment. It is not uncommon for the U.S. and other countries to spy on their allies. But public disclosures of such spying are uncomfortable for those allies, who need to explain to their populations how they will respond. It is going to take some time to rebuild trust with our allies, a U.S. defense official told Reuters. Ukraine leaks, has the Pentagon gone rogue on Biden? The White House is continuing to reel from the publication of trans-CHES of classified intelligence documents on the situation in Ukraine and other sensitive matters. Kiev officials rushed to blame Russia for the leaks. However, veteran intelligence expert Gregory Copley says they likely came from within the corridors of power in Washington. U.S. officials are scrambling to find the culprits behind the leak of troves of highly sensitive security assessments which appeared to reveal some unpleasant hard truths about the NATO-Russia proxy war in Ukraine. With both the Pentagon and the Department of Justice launching probes to try to root out the leakers. Officials in Kiev have dismissed the documents, which expose severe weaknesses in Ukraine's air defenses, staggering Ukrainian losses and Russian casualties far below previously released Ukrainian and Pentagon estimates, calling them Russian propaganda and accusing Moscow of doctoring them. The Kremlin dismissed the tendency to always blame everything on Russia as a disease suffered by adversaries. But the likely leakers are much closer to home, with their motives related to the growing disconnect between the Biden administration's fantastical view of the Ukrainian crisis and the somber reality, intelligence expert Gregory Copley believes. The leaks are damaging to the Biden administration simply because they highlight the degree of reality which is now becoming available to audiences around the world. The Biden administration had attempted to portray this as a war which Ukraine could win with just a little help from Washington and from the Europeans. That clearly is no longer the case. Certainly, the Biden administration had attempted to portray the Russian position as being one of massive loss. Therefore, it was unsustainable and unwinnable for Moscow. That's no longer seen as the case. From the beginning within many sections of the Western national security fields, there have been people in defense and intelligence in the US and Western Europe and so on who have felt that the Biden administration's insistence on supporting Ukraine was being done at the expense of showing a strong and resolute face to Beijing, the Observer told the media. Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association, a Washington-based think tank specializing in national and international security and strategic policy, and founder of the Global Information System, a private intelligence service catering to governments, says that behind the scenes, support for Ukraine among various agencies in Washington has been fracturing for some time. Yes, the Biden White House and State Department continue to be very strong in providing support for President Zelensky and Ukraine. But much of the rest of the administration, including the Defense Department and so on, have some reservations about what this is doing to American preparedness and, of course, also the cost of supporting Ukraine. Especially when it was evident that there are opportunities to seek a negotiated end to the conflict, the Observer explained. Saying it's impossible to say at this stage who leaked the information, Copley pointed out that there are many actors in D.C. who may have had the capacity and motive to do so. The sort of information would have been fairly broadly distributed within the administration, and because there are so many people frustrated with the White House's attitude toward Ukraine, there are a lot of people who would have been happy to see this information become public. At the same time, the Pentagon could not express any frustration with Biden out in the open, owing to the chain of command and the fact that public criticism of the commander-in-chief is out of the question for active duty officers, Copley noted. But the Dodd's growing skepticism isn't hard to explain, according to the Observer, from its position on the comparative long-term threat to the U.S. posed by Russia and China, to the military's awareness that decades of creeping NATO expansion in Eastern Europe, and attempts to swallow Ukraine, would inevitably provoke a response from the Russian bear. The veteran security analyst says he has consciously sought to convey in his advisory capacity to U.S. military audiences that Kiev and its Western patrons simply don't have the same strategic depth and existential necessity for victory that Moscow does. The point we've made in Washington is that Russia needs to maintain its access through its traditional territories down to the Black Sea, as well as over into the Pacific through the Russian Far Eastern territories, if it is to remain a unified global power. Without access to the warm waters of the Black Sea, without access to the Pacific and for that matter to the Baltic, Russia would find it very difficult to sustain its long-term position as a great power. So, Russia cannot afford to lose this war. Therefore, it will throw all necessary resources for however long it takes in order to ensure that it prevails in this war against Kiev, Copley emphasized. As for Kiev, he noted, the Zelensky government literally can only fight this war as long as the United States supplies it with money and technology, and even then, the results would only be deferring the inevitable Russian victory. Saying he could only speculate on what the leakers of the documents were trying to achieve, Copley suggested that the goal may have been to inject a tone of realism into the public discussion on Ukraine, and perhaps bring the prospect of peace talks closer to reality. Until now, all Western policy toward the war and towards supporting Ukraine has been done on the basis of very, very selective and biased propaganda which reinforced the White House's message that Russia must be defeated and Ukraine must be defended. That was unrealistic from the beginning. Now we are seeing a much more detailed, complex and balanced discussion beginning to emerge in the West about the importance of this war, or the relative importance of this war, and the ramifications of the war for the global strategic posture as a whole, the Observer summed up. Musk gives Twitter sign foul-mouthed makeover. The CEO then renamed himself Harry Bowles. Twitter CEO Elon Musk has jokingly rebranded his company Twitter and himself as Harry Bowles, in his latest potty-mouthed prank since his takeover of the social media platform. A photo posted on Twitter last week apparently showed that someone had papered over the W on the sign outside the company's San Francisco headquarters. While some Twitter users assumed the image had been photoshopped, Musk confirmed on Sunday that he had since ordered the letter to be painted over, changing the sign to read Twitter. Musk said that as San Francisco law forbade him from removing the letter entirely, he simply had it changed to the same color as the sign's background. Problem solved, he exclaimed. The world's second richest man evidently wasn't done with the toilet humor, and on Monday Musk changed his Twitter username to Harry Bowles, for no apparent reason save for the obvious innuendo. Within minutes of the name change, Twitter users noticed that someone had created a Harry Bowles cryptocurrency. Musk purchased Twitter for $44 billion last October, and immediately set about rolling back some of the platform's more odious speech restrictions while cutting its workforce by 3/4 in a bid to right its finances. Along the way, the billionaire has injected his own irreverent sense of humor into proceedings, most recently when he announced last month that all inquiries from journalists to Twitter's press email address would receive a POO emoji as an automated reply. Musk's penchant for pranks is apparently turning off advertisers, however. According to a report last week by online news source Semaphore, some of America's top marketing executives are nervous about appearing beside Harry Bowles at a trade conference in Miami later this month. In one email cited by Semaphore, McDonald's chief marketing officer Tariq Hassan accused Musk of perpetuating racism by lifting Twitter's speech restrictions. When Forbes magazine contacted Twitter for comment on Thursday, it received a poop emoji in response. Korea to ask U.S. for appropriate action when spying details confirmed. South Korea's presidential office said on Monday it will demand the U.S. to take appropriate action regarding reports of the United States' alleged spying on its top security officials when details of the matter are confirmed, Yonhap news agency reported. The presidential office also said checking facts is a top priority and that potential distortion of intelligence and third-party interference in the process cannot be ruled out, another news outlet, YTN, reported. Media reports showed a set of leaked Pentagon documents shared on social media revealed that U.S. intelligence services eavesdropped on conversations at the South Korean presidential office in early March regarding whether to provide weapons support to Ukraine. Once the two countries finish figuring out the situation, we plan to request appropriate measures from the U.S. if necessary, Yonhap reported, citing a presidential official, who noted that the reports on the leaked documents have not yet been verified as true and that a U.S. government investigation is underway. If there are forces trying to exaggerate this incident ahead of the South Korea U.S. summit or distort it to undermine the alliance, they will face the resistance of many people, the official told Yonhap. The summit mentioned refers to the meeting between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden on April 26. According to Yonhap, the official also denied accusations from the main opposition Democratic Party that the alleged eavesdropping resulted from the Yoon administration's hasty relocation of the presidential office. In terms of security at the presidential office building, we prepared perfectly during the relocation process, and though I can't divulge details, we are still carrying out regular checks on areas that you're concerned about, and there have been no problems until now, the official told Yonhap. U.S. Senator warns Europeans over picking sides. The EU may have to deal with the Ukraine conflict without Washington's help if it acts soft towards China, Marco Rubio has threatened. America's Western European allies may end up having to resolve the Ukraine conflict on their own if they do not wish to pick sides in Washington's standoff with China, U.S. Senator Marco Rubio has warned. The Florida Republican sharply criticized French President Emmanuel Macron, who has argued that European states should not risk being dragged into a confrontation over Taiwan. The question Europeans need to answer, is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis in Taiwan? No, Macron told journalists, after wrapping up his 3-day trip to China. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the US agenda and a Chinese overreaction, Macron added. Rubio responded with a video on Twitter. This is a good moment for us to ask Europe, does Macron now speak for all Europe? Is Macron now the head of Europe? He said. Because if he is, then there's some things we are going to need to change. The politician claimed that China was very excited about Macron's comments. Rubio argued that European countries were still reliant on Washington's defense capabilities, while we are spending a lot of our taxpayer money on a European war in Ukraine. If their position now is, we are not going to pick sides between the US and China over Taiwan, then maybe we shouldn't be picking sides either. Maybe we should basically say, we're going to focus on Taiwan and the threats that China poses, and you guys handle Ukraine and Europe. On Friday, Beijing launched 3-day naval maneuvers around Taiwan in response to the visit of Tsai Ing-wen, the island's president, to the U.S. Tsai met with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who pledged to continue to support Taipei. Beijing considers Taiwan, which has been ruled by a separate government since the late 1940s, as its territory and views third country contact with Taipei officials as meddling in its domestic affairs. In August, China's People Liberation Army held snap drills in the Taiwan Strait after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a visit to the island. The U.S. formally upholds the One China policy, refraining from establishing official diplomatic relations with Taipei. At the same time, Washington has sold weapons to Taiwan and promised to defend it in case of an attack from the mainland. During his visit, Macron said China could be a major factor in achieving a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated that Beijing was ready to play a constructive role in ending the conflict. 5 killed in shooting in downtown Louisville. 5 people were killed in a shooting in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, U.S. on Monday, said the police. The shooter has been neutralized, said the police. Russia warns of rampant arms smuggling in Ukraine. Moscow has spent the better part of the past year warning about the security consequences of the appearance of Western weapons sent to Kiev on international arms black markets. U.S. and European officials have largely sought to downplay the scale of the problem and sweep it under the rug. Russia is making the most of its presidency of the United Nations Security Council. On Monday morning in New York, Russian diplomats plan to hold a special briefing dedicated to the risks stemming from violations of the agreements regulating the export of weapons and military equipment, and the threats posed to international peace and security. The briefing, overseen by High Representative for Disarmament Affairs Izumi Nakamitsu, is expected to include a discussion of the tens of billions in sophisticated Western weapons sent to Ukraine, and the risks such transfers pose amid their propensity to be smuggled and re-exported to other global hotspots, and sold to criminal groups or terrorists. Vasily Nebenzia, Russia's permanent representative to the UN, said the meeting would be an important opportunity for nations to consider the negative consequences of non-compliance with agreements on the export of weapons and military equipment, and said the meeting could identify ways to improve mechanisms for controlling such exports. Russia has no plans to monopolize the focus of discussions on a specific country or regional context, Nebenzia added. Western media and Ukrainian officials predictably attacked the Russia-backed agenda, calling Moscow's Security Council presidency absurdity to a new level and the worst joke ever for April Fool's Day. But the question at issue is an important one, and not limited to concerns expressed by Russian officials, since the implications of Ukrainian weapons smuggling activities are literally global in scale. For example, police and officials in Nordic countries have been warning since last year that small arms being sent to Ukraine were somehow ending up in the hands of local gangs. In November, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari warned that weapons sent to Ukraine were beginning to filter through to Boko Haram terrorists in Africa. Interpol chief Jürgen Stock has warned that the high availability of arms being sent to Ukraine would inevitably result in the proliferation in illicit arms in the post-conflict phase. Last summer, a major U.S. media outlet released and then scrubbed an investigative feature after it was discovered that as little as 30% of the tens of billions of dollars in Western arms aid to Ukraine was actually reaching the front. U.S. officials have attempted to downplay these concerns. Last month, officials assured House Foreign Affairs Committee lawmakers that they had no evidence of weapons assistance being misused by Kiev. Those comments echoed assurances made by the Pentagon in late February, when a spokesperson said that the U.S. military was not seeing any evidence of systemic diversion of the equipment the United States has provided. U.S. officials and the Pentagon have made these assurances despite admissions by the White House and the military as far back as last April that they didn't actually know where Western military aid to Ukraine was going once it made its way into the country. Real bad situation. I think we've got a real bad situation here, says Earl Rasmussen, VA retired lieutenant colonel with over 20 years in the U.S. Army and international consultant, referring to the growing international concerns about Ukrainian arms smuggling. We've got African presidents saying that the arms have been infiltrated into rebel groups confronting them. I've actually seen pictures of weapons that say not for sale in Turkish markets. So it's a very bad problem. I think they're covering up, Rasmussen told Sputnik. Whether Western officials are directly involved in such smuggling or merely covering up for their Ukrainian colleagues is hard to say, the Observer believes. Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe and one of the most corrupt in the world. So are their military people reselling arms? Yes, absolutely. That's how they get power. So you've got corruption there. Now, are the Western elites, is someone involved in that? I don't know. It's tough to say that. Without further evidence I can't accuse them. I think they realize that the sales are going on. Maybe they're trying to address it somehow. On the other side, there are concerns in our Congress, and yet we've been basically blocked from doing any type of thorough investigation, from appointing an inspector general to oversee the process. There's members that are advocating the work, but it does not have the support of the full Congress, Rasmussen said. Following the 2022 midterms, a small group of MAGA Republicans has indeed been seeking further scrutiny of U.S. aid to Ukraine, but their efforts have been sabotaged not just by the White House and the Democrats, but by hawkish members of their own party. In January, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Mike McCall expressed enthusiastic support for more arms aid to Kiev, and accused colleagues of failing to understand the significance of more no-questions-asked arms aid to Ukraine. Whatever the case may be, there's no way that the Zelensky government and European and U.S. leaders aren't aware of what's going on, Rasmussen opines. The Observer believes the smuggling likely takes place inside Ukraine, with the weapons making their way into the country, and then getting rerouted via a hole in the supply chain. They're probably going through a criminal organization. They've got contacts, maybe going through an oligarch of some type, maybe through Georgia or Turkey and then down into Africa. We've got ultranationalist neo-Nazis that are very heavily involved in the Ukrainian military. I'm sure they have contacts and connections there. So it could be going through those types of organizations as well, the Observer said. However it happens, in the end these arms wind up on the black market, including the dark web, and then in the hands of criminal groups, terrorists, and rebels. The danger of these deliveries can't be overemphasized, Rasmussen believes, since they serve to embolden global terrorist groups, result in an escalation of violence and terrorist activity around the world, and threaten to ease proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, like depleted uranium that could be used in a dirty bomb. The U.S. and its allies would obviously like to keep the weapons smuggling problem under wraps, and to limit congressional investigations as much as possible, due to the politically sensitive implications, according to the Observer. It's an embarrassment, at least for the Biden administration. It would be embarrassing if it got leaked to the public that all these endless bottomless deliveries of weapons and funding that we are providing were getting in the hands of criminal organizations. That doesn't look good, especially with an election season coming up. The Europeans want to cover that up as well, Rasmussen emphasized. Could the weapons even be tracked? Rasmussen, who is a veteran expert on defense systems management and military supply chains, says tracking arms shipments bound for Ukraine would be quite easy to ensure, if the political will existed to do so. We are not even trying to put in any type of tracking. When we first sold some F-16s or F-22s to Poland, I know for a fact that they were tracking everything, with all the thousands and thousands of parts, a very complex supply chain. They were tracking it on an Excel spreadsheet. We actually went in and helped put in a more robust automated system for tracking. Taking into account the amount of money that we're sending in weapons, we could definitely carve something out to have a system for tracking. Why we are closing our eyes to it rather than trying to get a handle on tracking, it is anyone's guess. It would seem like somebody doesn't want to track that. We're kind of washing our hands once it gets over to Ukraine. That's irresponsible of Western countries. If they don't have a good tracking method, then we should have a tracking method developed in order to keep track of all of these things. These are high-cost items, and it's a dangerous situation that could easily escalate if these things get into the wrong hands, Rasmussen urged. Shady schemes. Konstantin Sivkov, deputy president of the Russian Academy of Rocket and Artillery Sciences, a Moscow-based military think tank, has no doubt in his mind that the US and European establishment is involved in the weapons smuggling process, telling Sputnik that otherwise. Investigations would have started a long time ago. The weapons are written off as losses, but in fact remain serviceable. Then these written-off weapons are transferred to the gray arms market, put up for sale online, transferred to resellers, and everything is sent to the designated address. For example, Ukraine used gray schemes to send Libya not only grenade launchers, but entire tanks, Sivkov said, referring to investigations into Ukrainian arms smuggling schemes going back even before the present conflict. The West may not recognize the severe consequences of this situation, Sivkov noted, pointing out that when weapons appear in the hands of criminal individuals and criminal structures, they can cause serious damage to the security of any state. Whatever Western countries do next, for Moscow, the observer said, the main thing to ensure now is that smuggled weapons don't end up in the hands of Russian criminal elements or terrorists. And to ensure this, measures exist defined by Russian law involving the border services, customs, the FSB, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Sivkov said. Russia cuts oil production more than anticipated, Bloomberg. Moscow has reduced its crude output in retaliation to Western sanctions. Russia slashed its oil output in March by 40% more than previously announced, Bloomberg has reported, citing a source familiar with Energy Ministry data. The decline was the equivalent of around 700,000 barrels per day, BPD, the outlet stated. In February, Russia pledged to voluntarily reduce oil production by 500,000 BPD, starting from March. The move was part of retaliation to sanctions, which also saw sales halted to buyers that comply with a Western-imposed price ceiling of $60 per barrel on Russian oil. However, the actual reduction turned out to be 40% higher, Bloomberg reported, citing ministry data. When announcing the crude output cut, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said it would be based on February production volumes, which Bloomberg estimated at 10.1 million BPD. Figures revealed to the outlet by an anonymous source showed a daily average of 1.285 million tons of crude pumped last month, or the equivalent of around 9.4 million barrels. This indicates a production cut of nearly 700,000 BPD, the outlet calculated. Production of crude oil and condensate totaled 1.413 million tons in March, which is equivalent to 10.36 million BPD, compared to 11.1 million barrels in February, according to Bloomberg calculations. The figures correspond to cuts of about 740,000 BPD, the outlet said. Russia has repeatedly warned of potential output cuts since the EU and G7 began discussing a cap on the price of Russian exports. Moscow has called the measure an intervention in market relations and an extension of destructive energy policies by the West. Earlier this month, 8 members of the OPEC Plus group, including major oil producers such as Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait, pledged a total of 1.66 million BPD of cuts on top of ones already introduced in November. The shock announcement sent global crude prices soaring. The OPEC Plus countries said they would introduce voluntary additional cuts to their output, starting from May until the end of 2023, in order to stabilize the oil market. China's car market in March, strong luxury sales, exports up 172% YoY. In March 2023, retail sales of the passenger car market in China reached almost 1.6 million units with a year-on-year growth of 0.3% and a month-on-month growth of 14.3%, the weakest March growth rate the country has ever registered in this century. The China Passenger Car Association, CPCA, attributed the weak retail sales performance to factors such as low consumption and wait-and-see atmosphere caused by market price chaos. Nonetheless, retail sales of 270,000 luxury cars recorded a 17% year-on-year and 35% month-on-month growth. Separately, retail sales of Chinese brands totaled 770,000 units, up 2% year-on-year and 9% month-on-month. The domestic retail share of Chinese brands was 48.8%, a year-on-year growth of 0.7 percentage points. With increased export capacity, 290,000 passenger cars were exported, up 172% year-on-year, of which new energy vehicles accounted for almost a quarter. From January to March, 780,000 passenger cars were exported, up 90% year-on-year. The Shanghai Auto Show, to be held on April 18, will surely become a powerful platform and catalyst to promote domestic auto consumption. The quantity of the orders placed at the auto show will also become an important indicator of the market warming up. According to the CPCA, due to the impact of the United States Federal Reserve's interest rate hike, the Chinese car market was affected by multiple pressures such as shrinking demand, oversupply and weakening expectations at the beginning of this year, resulting in insufficient consumption in the new car market. In order to stabilize economic growth driven by automobile consumption, it is necessary to make comprehensive efforts from both policy and market perspectives to boost market confidence, the CPCA added. Why U.S. ban on Russian aluminum may prove lucky break for Europe. The Biden administration has slapped a 200% duty on new Russian-made aluminum and scrap, with the tariffs stepping fully into force this week. While the move was obviously designed to put a dent in Russia's aluminum producers, American industrialists may ultimately be the ones left holding the bag. Here's why. The 200% duty on Russian aluminum that entered into force on Monday may cause some economic pain for Russian producers over the short term, but in the long term will leave U.S. manufacturers in an unenviable position, according to Dr. Leonid Hazanov, a leading Russian economist specializing in industry and energy. In an interview with Sputnik, Hazanov explained that formally, Washington's restrictions are driven by national security concerns, and the interests of protecting the U.S. domestic market from Russian exports. In reality, the observer said, "We're talking solely about an attempt to increase sanctions pressure on Russia, based on how the sanctions already introduced seem to have worked very poorly or have had no effect at all." Russia produces over 3.5 million tons of primary aluminum per year. The 180,000 to 190,000 tons of that which has fallen under restrictions is a relatively small amount. If we're talking about aluminum semi-finished goods, about flat-rolled aluminum, its production amounts to about 400,000 tons per year. The volume of deliveries to the U.S. amounts to around 19,000 tons per year, almost nothing, Hazanov said. According to The Economist, the inclusion of primary aluminum could be quite unpleasant for Russia, since it means producers will have to reorient to other markets, find new clients, or expand sales to existing ones. I see two options, Europe or Asia. In Europe, aluminum smelters were stopped or cut production due to high energy prices. Accordingly, production volumes dropped, according to various estimates, from 1 million to 1.5 million tons per year. This is quite a lot. So, one option is Europe. I think they may rant and rave for a little while, but ultimately take our supplies, especially if offered a discount, Hazanov noted. The second option is deliveries to Asia, India, China, and possibly Japan, if they want to take it. The Japanese banned the export of aluminum to Russia, although we never bought it from them, and on the contrary, Japan itself is a major importer of aluminum, importing about 2 million tons, the observer added. Like the Europeans, Japan would probably ask for a discount, under the pretext of sanctions-related toxicity, but this may prove acceptable to Russia, since the domestic market has seen better days and likely wouldn't know what to do with so much excess metal. Sanctions danger? Negotiating with Europe could prove difficult, given the sanctions-happy bureaucracy in Brussels, but if national self-interest and restrictions imposed in 2022 are anything to go by, which left non-ferrous metals off the sanctions list, the bloc may cave, Hazanov believes. What is Europe's problem right now? On the one hand, their aluminum production has declined sharply. On the other, their automotive production volumes are slowly recovering. It's not easy for European automakers to live in such conditions, they have few purchasing options. It's either Russia or the Middle East or China. It's not advantageous for them to buy from China for political reasons, because for the past 20 years the EU has fought off Chinese aluminum imports in every way possible after they periodically overwhelmed the local market. As for the Middle East, their producers could very easily raise prices. Which leaves Russia. If Europe wants to impose sanctions on Russian aluminum, no problem, they will depend on Chinese and Middle Eastern suppliers. That's not good for them. The latter could lower prices in order to strengthen their presence, and then jack them up. As for Russia, its reorientation to new markets away from the US will likely take between 6 months and a year, and require negotiations, the signing of agreements, logistics, etc., the observer says. Hazanov is hopeful that Russian aluminum giant Rusal will be able to reorient its production away without reducing output. A reorientation to the east will strengthen our cooperation. It will be like with oil, I've read that today, the main volume of Russian oil is going to India, accounting for about 75% of the volumes we used to supply to the Europeans. Furthermore, China in general sees us as a strategic partner, as evidenced by the recent visit of its leader. Accordingly, all Asian countries will benefit from this, while the Americans will be the ones having a lot of fun. They themselves wanted this. According to Hazanov, the US is now likely to turn to Canadian aluminum to replace the supplies it once got from Russia, an attempt to increase domestic production. But it's unlikely that they will succeed because of the rather high cost of energy resources exacerbated by market whims and the lack of state regulation. The US automotive industry was the main consumer of Russian aluminum, with purchases used for the production of various castings, engine parts, wheels, and the rolled aluminum from which car bodies are made, the expert said. Hazanov expects the drop in Russian supplies to lead to at least a 10 to 15% uptick in US prices, and cause a short-term shortage of the metal, which producers will make up for through purchases from other countries. If we look at primary aluminum production in the US over the last 10 to 20 years, we see a systematic drop due to high energy costs, while the production of secondary aluminum has increased as an alternative. In principle, the production of secondary aluminum in the US still has room for expansion, but there is a problem with the availability of scrap, because there is no excess scrap in the US, and would need to be purchased wherever available, most likely Mexico. Accordingly, prices could rise in these conditions, the economist concluded. China's deep-sea gas field goes fully remote-controlled, typhoon-proof. China's offshore oil giant, China National Offshore Oil Corporation, NUC, announced on Monday that it has achieved full remote control operations of Shenhai-1, the first deep-sea gas platform operated by a Chinese company. The upgraded platform is capable of working in extreme weather conditions, such as typhoons, with no human intervention needed. According to a Nuuk manager, the Shenhai-1 is the world's first semi-submersible deep-sea gas platform to operate successfully in a typhoon while being operated by remote control. This groundbreaking development is a key step towards Nuuk's goal of smart gas fields and a key breakthrough for China's energy security, the company said. Located in the South China Sea, southeast of Hainan Island, the Shenhai-1 gas field is the world's first 100,000-ton level semi-submersible deep-sea gas platform with an annual production capacity of 3 billion cubic meters. It began operations in June 2021, and its remote control upgrade marks a significant milestone in China's efforts to expand its offshore energy production capabilities. Russian scientists to start working on prototype of Venus research station by early 2024. The head of Russia's Space Research Institute said Monday that the next stage of an ambitious space mission to send an orbital research station to Venus will begin in late 2023 or early 2024. Russia plans to launch the Venerity mission in 2029, building on the experience of the Soviet Venus exploration programs that go back as early as the 1960s. We have submitted pre-project plans. We are preparing to move on to the next stage at the end of this year or early next year and start working on a preliminary design, Anatoly Petrukovich told a press conference. The Space Research Institute has outlined the mission's goals and will now identify the equipment needed to meet them, Petrukovich explained. The mission will explore planetary life on Venus, the closest planet to the Earth with a similar size and history. The orbital station will be fitted with chemical sensors that will look for traces of gases associated with recent volcanic and tectonic activity. The goal is to understand how greenhouse gases heat up the Venusian atmosphere to a hellish 467 degrees Celsius, 872 F, and what makes its upper layers rotate 60 times faster than the planet's surface.